Namo Buddhaya. Good evening. Welcome to Buddha Dhamma TV. I am Lisa Chu. Today, we begin our program as usual with the blessing service conducted by Venerable Vatala Selaratana. To achieve the desired calmness, please listen to the chanting mindfully. Here is Venerable Selaratana to conduct the chanting.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma Itipiso bhagava araham samma sambuddho vichacharana sampanno sugato lokavidu anuttaro purisa dhamma sarati sattha deva manussanam buddho bhagavati Swakato bhagavata dhammo sanditthiko akaliko ehipassiko opanayiko pacchattam veditabbo vinyuhiti supatipanno bhagavato sāvaka sangho ujupatipanno bhagavato sāvaka sangho nyāya patipanno bhagavato sāvaka sangho sāmīti patipanno bhagavato sāvaka sangho yadidam cattari purisa yugani aṭṭha purisa pukkala Esa bhagavato sāvaka sangho āhuniyo pāhuniyo dakkhiniyo anjali karaniyo anuttaram punyam kirtam lokasvati etena sacca vajjena sottite hotu sabbada etena sacca vajjena sottite hotu sabbada etena sacca vajjena sottite hotu sabbada.
Venerable Kovida presented a remarkable sermon on the Anatta Lakkhana Sutta yesterday. Let's welcome Venerable Kovida from Toronto to continue with the second part of his sermon. Here is Venerable Kovida to deliver the second part of his sermon.
And then we go to the element of space inside the body. We've experienced it while breathing, right, in the lungs. But of course, if you open your mouth, the mouth cavity is there, the space inside the mouth. And in the esophagus, otherwise known as the windpipe, there's space, or space in the lungs, space in the stomach, space in the intestines, and there's space in the ear cavity, which allows sound vibration to take place, giving rise to hearing consciousness. So we're able to experience hearing consciousness because of the space in the ear cavity. And then we have space in the nostrils, which allows, in-breath, out-breath to take place. So there's a lot of space inside the body. And when the mind is quiet, more silent, we can experience spacious awareness. Because as you know from experience, when the mind is busy thinking, being preoccupied, or you're obsessed about something, there is no space in the mind. And you notice, when you're obsessing about something, worried about something, somehow it feels very tense, right? You feel very tense inside the head. Whereas when the mind is more quiet, you feel more relaxed. There's no tension. There's no tension in the head when you're calm, when you're quiet. So you experience that spacious awareness. Because awareness by nature is spacious. And it's because of awareness that we can be aware of space, say, of this room. We can experience the space in this room. Where if we're busy thinking about something, we're not aware of the space around us. It's just like you can be in a very spectacularly beautiful place. Think of it. Just imagine a beautiful scenery. But if your mind is preoccupied, we cannot really appreciate that beauty, that environment. Because we're not receptive. We're not present. I remember once I was watching a very spectacular sunset, very vivid colors, and sunset, and the colors keep changing, right? As the sun goes lower and lower. It's really spectacular. And I was with two friends, and they were busy talking, right? And they're totally caught up in whatever they were talking about. And I would say, hey, look how incredible that sunset is. And they would look up, oh yeah, nice, and they go, blah, 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 blah. So their appreciation of the spectacular sunset was very superficial. As they say, you see it, but you don't see it, because you're not receptive. Because what you're talking about or what you're obsessing about is more important. Your mental activity, how do you say, it acts as a barrier to that sensitive perception of what is there, what is in front of you. So this is why there's that type of, we call it nature meditation or space meditation, where your mind is calm, quiet, and you just look and listen. And it's a natural practice, very natural. And you see things coming and going in that spacious awareness. The Tibetans call this the sky-like quality of mind, when you have that open awareness. The mind is like the sky. The drifting clouds are like our changing thoughts and ideas. The gray-dark clouds and wind are like our emotions and moods. The thunder and lightning are like our anger and temper. The falling rain like our sadness, sorrow, and tears. But above the ever-changing clouds and weather is a clear blue sky. Similarly, above our constantly changing mental states is awareness, mindfulness, calm attention, clear, vast, and peaceful. The sky is clear and unaffected by what is happening. The clouds and wind come and go. So does rain and sunlight. But the sky remains clear, vast, and peaceful. See the mind as a clear blue sky, or the night sky filled with stars. And let everything arise and pass away, come and go on its own. Then the mind will stay balanced, peaceful, and free, observing the flow of events and our temporary mental, emotional states. Such is the nature of awareness, calm, spacious, and peaceful. So this is a reflection from that Tibetan tradition. The Buddha taught to look at the 5 factors of experience as 5 constantly flowing rivers which contain nothing that could be called separate, permanent, or unchanging. The 5 aggregates or factors of experience are body, feelings or sensation, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. By meditating on these factors within ourselves, we can see the intimate and wondrous connection between themselves and in all things in the universe. Meditating on interdependence and interconnectedness is very important. All things depend on each other for their arising, development, and decline. Without dependent co-arising, nothing could exist. Within one thing exist all things. Meditation on dependent co-arising is the gate that leads to liberation from birth and death. It has the power to break through fixed and narrow views, such as the belief that the universe has been created by some God or supreme being. And I think we did the paper reflection before, I think during the retreat. Do you remember? The paper reflection, yes. But I don't think you've heard this one. Okay. Very briefly, normally we just see this as a piece of paper, right? But when we look deeply, we begin to see all the factors that have caused this piece of paper to exist, to come into being. And the first thing we see is the tree, okay? And if you see the tree, we see the soil, the dirt. And we see also the seed from which the tree originated. And it's good to remember the seed, because when we see a large old tree, we tend to forget that that large old tree actually started as a tiny seedling, right? We tend to forget that. So we see the seed. We also see all the bacteria in the soil. You know, microbes and also earthworms. There are also earthworms there. And even birds and insects that help the tree to grow. And of course we see the rain. And if we see rain, we see clouds, right? Now, a few minutes ago, if I said to you, look here, do you see clouds? You think I was crazy, right? But now, do you see clouds? And actually, every time we drink something, any liquid at all, there are clouds, right? Any liquid, even soy milk, or 100 plus, there are clouds. You can't escape it. And if you see clouds, you see the oceans, the rivers, the lakes. And you see the sun, right? The energy of the sun. And if you see the sun, you see the entire solar system. And if you see the solar system, you see the Milky Way galaxy. Fortunately, we can, on YouTube, you can see some fantastic photos of galaxies. So this sheet of paper is a product of the Milky Way galaxy. Just imagine. And what the Dhamma is teaching us, if one of these factors that we just mentioned was missing, if one of these factors was missing, this piece of paper could not exist. Because everything is interconnected, interdependent. Now, because this piece of paper didn't come directly from the tree, because it's processed, we have the human factor also. Then it gets really complicated. Right? We see the people who cut the trees down, the people who transported the logs to the pulp and paper factory. We see the people who worked in the factory, including all the machinery, all the technology. Then we see the people who transported the paper from the factory to the urban areas. Then we see the people who use that factory, produce paper to make many, many kinds of paper products. Imagine, right? There's a lot of paper products, right? So there's a lot of people involved when you think of it. And each person that was involved in the production of this piece of paper, each person exists because of so many factors. And you begin to see that life is really a very complex web of interrelationships. And we mentioned before, if you just take all our direct ascendants, just our direct ascendants, you'll be amazed how many people are involved for you to exist. First, we have two parents, right? Well, I hope you have two parents. Then you have 4 grandparents. It's an easy calculation. You can do that when you're at home. 4 grandparents, you have 8 great-grandparents, right? And 16, you double the number. 16, what, great-great-grandparents. Then 32, great-great-great-grandparents. And 64, great-great-great-great-grandparents. Then what is it? 128, I think. 128, great-great-great-great-grandparents. And the number just multiply. Make the calculation yourself. You'll be amazed. By, 10 generations of ancestors, and then 12, you're up to thousands of ancestors. And these are just our direct ascendants. And then you think of all our uncles and aunties and all our cousins, right? First cousins. Then think of our, grand aunties, grand uncles, and all these cousins that we call what? Second, third, fourth cousins. You really begin to see how complex the web of life is. And then you take into account all the people who have influenced our lives, who are not related to us, blood relatives. It's extremely, extremely complex. Like all your friends, your co-workers, your neighbors, and all the food that we eat, and the people that were involved in producing all the food we have eaten, extremely, extremely complex. So this is one of the Dhamma teachings to show us that the idea of a permanent, concrete, independent I is just an illusion. It's an illusion. Yeah. Now, there's one factor we have not mentioned for this piece of paper to exist, right? How do you know I'm holding this piece of paper, right? How do you know?
My mind is...
To be more precise? That's right, seeing consciousness, awareness, seeing consciousness, that's right. So for example, if you were snoozing, you wouldn't be aware that I'm holding the piece of paper. Yeah. So awareness, yeah. A very common question is, what is the difference between awareness and consciousness? Very interesting. What is the difference between awareness and consciousness? Many people would immediately say, there's no difference. Because very often when we say, I'm conscious of something, it means that we're aware of something, right? But there's actually a difference. They're connected, but there's a difference. It's because of awareness. Remember now, with awareness comes knowing, right? The intuitive knowing. It's because of awareness that we know that we're seeing something. Can you see that? It's because of awareness we know that we're seeing something, that we're hearing something, that we're touching something. You're feeling something by touch. With awareness we know that we're touching something. Can you see the difference? But there's also a connection. With awareness, we know that we're smelling something, just like when you're eating. Next time, if you go home, you eat something, just apply your mindfulness and you see, with awareness, we know we're eating something, that we're tasting something. But usually, if we're not really focused, we just say, they're the same. Awareness is... It's very interesting. And as we said, when the body-mind process dies, and this is another interesting thing about the body-mind process, when we reflect on it, we begin to see that, when there's a death, we usually say somebody dies, somebody passes away, right? Because that is our human convention, human language. Somebody dies, somebody passes away. Normal. But when we go deeper, you see the reality of body-mind process, Rupa Nama simply shuts down. You see the difference? Or body-mind process, it just stops working. On that level. But on the social level, we say, somebody dies, somebody passes away. Very profound. But when you see it, it's so clear. And of course, we believe that, a self exists. Like I exist, a self exists. And we believe that other selves, other people, personalities also exist. And of course, other people, we die. But according to in the Dharma, what the Dharma is teaching us, that is actually a wrong understanding, not quite accurate. That a self lives, a self is born, and a self dies. Or we believe that a self sees, hears, smells, tastes, touch, and thinks. But in reality, it's really, the body and the mind who's experiencing all these things. In other words, there's no permanent I who's actually experiencing these things. Seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching. It's just process. We believe that a self exists, that there's a permanent, concrete, separate, and independent ego center that sees, hears, tastes, smells, feels, and thinks. We believe that a self lives and dies. We believe that other selves exist, other people. This is the incorrect view of reality. What we take for self are only ever-changing phenomena. In reality, there is no I, no he, no she. These are just labels for social communication. These are just labels for social communication. We spend our lives dreaming about things which do not exist. Our wrong view causes us attachment and suffering. We have expectations of ourselves and others. And if these do not come through, we suffer from frustration, disappointment, anguish, and so on. We are afraid of death, and we do not know what happens to the self after we die. It would be most beneficial if you could see your life as it really is, only changing phenomena, physical and mental. Then we could face with right understanding sickness, aging, and death. All phenomena in ourselves and around us are only two kinds of realities: physical, rupa, and mental, nama. Nama experiences or knows. Rupa, the physical, doesn't know anything, meaning mentally. What we take for self or a person are only changing phenomena. Only rupa and nama, body and mind. This includes animals and insects. Emotions are only transitory and empty of self. Our whole life is like a chain of moments in consciousness arising and falling away. When we realize that our life is actually only rupa and nama, only physical and mental phenomena which arise due to conditions, we can be more patient and calm even in difficult situations. Then we don't take things so personally. Yeah, it's a very profound teaching. So then, as we said, the elements go back to nature when the body-mind process stops working. And the first element that leaves the body is the heat element. This is why if you touch a dead body, what you notice, it feels cold. That warmth that that you normally experience when you touch a live person, it's not there. Have you ever touched a dead body? Okay. That's what you feel. I don't think you've touched one, right? So you experience that the heat element is the first element to leave. And it's obvious because if you think in terms of process, right, body-mind process, because it stops working, it shuts down, so naturally there's no more heat, no metabolism. And of course, you know, when a body is cremated, cremation, it just speeds up the decomposition process. It speeds it up. So within an hour or so, you just get, you know, ashes and bones, bits of bones, you know, the earth element. Whereas if a body is allowed to decompose in a natural way and exposed to the elements, you know, eventually, of course, you get the skeleton, and then the bones eventually, you know, turn to dust. The bones become dust, like this. And you get a bit deeper than the elements, and we have atoms. Atoms, otherwise known as cosmic energy. Because everything is composed of atoms. And you may recall the first law of science that says energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can only change its form, and it can move from one place to another. So on that deep level of reflection, we're able to go beyond the idea of birth and death. We're able to go beyond the idea of birth and death. Yeah. It's very profound. But like anything profound, if you reflect on it in a more regular way, just like the elements, then you begin to see the truth of it more clearly. And then it's no longer profound. It's like the elements. You begin to see the elements as a fact. You really see the elements as a fact. I think I mentioned this before in the retreat. What's unique about atoms is that they get recycled all the time. Remember? Yeah. So the atoms in our bodies at this very moment have been recycled many, many times. And most of the atoms in our bodies at this moment, they have been around the planet many, many times because of the weather, you know, the weather patterns. So there are a few atoms in our bodies, most likely were once in the bodies of dinosaurs. Think of it. Yeah. And they existed a long time ago, right? A few million years. And because we're 70% water, many of our atoms that are in our bodies at this moment were once in the sky, as water vapor, rain, clouds, and of course snow in the northern hemisphere. And we mentioned too another interesting fact of atoms, that it's possible that there's one atom in our bodies at this moment was once in the body of somebody famous or well-known long, long time ago, right? You may recall this one. And a good person to start with is Genghis Khan. You know Genghis Khan, one of our ancestors. And if you read the history of Genghis Khan and the Mongols, you know, they got around. They were very mobile because of the Mongolian horse, you know. They rode but across Asia, I think, and they got as far as Eastern Europe, I think. Yeah. And the only reason why they didn't invade Western Europe is because he died. He died before they got to Western Europe. but he got around. And then another person we can consider is Julius Caesar, from the Roman Empire. So it's possible that there's one atom in our bodies that was once in the physical form of Julius Caesar. And maybe Genghis Khan's grandson, Kublai Khan. Kublai Khan, yeah. It's very possible that one atom in our bodies was once in the body of Kublai Khan. But according to history, he was not like his grandfather. He didn't want to ride around. He liked his creature comforts. He liked to be comfortable. Yeah. And we mentioned too about Jesus. It's possible there's one atom in our bodies that was once in the body of Jesus, of Nazareth. That Jesus. And we mentioned too that it's possible that one atom in our bodies was once in the body of the Buddha. That's right, once in the body of the Buddha. But we did mention also, it doesn't mean that we are enlightened. It's just the nature of atoms. I think I understand your question. Okay, just on the genetic part of it, I think they discovered, the scientists who do genetic research, they have figured that Genghis Khan has spread his DNA quite a bit, a wide range, quite range of the Mongolian gene was spread because, they traveled so widely because of the horse. But atoms is something very different. Atoms are something much smaller. It's a smaller unit of energy than genetic material. What the Dharma is teaching us is to understand things at a deeper level that is beyond the ego. Because the problem is the ego, the attachment to ego. And I can see it in North America very clearly. With the sense of I is very strong, and they take themselves seriously. And I have to achieve, I have to prove myself. So when you have that strong sense of ego, of self, and of course I am permanent, you find that people have more anxiety, worry, fear, insecurity, and also greed. You train the mind, because that's the meaning of meditation. It's mind training, mind cultivation. To focus, to calm the mind, so you look deeply. And this takes time. You must remember these profound teachings came from the forest tradition. Not somebody working, for a company with all the high-tech stuff. People had time, not only the Buddha, but other forest monks. And they were living close to nature, and they were able to see things more clearly. So lifestyle is very important. And you must remember, there was no internet and there were no smartphones. This is why I like to say, if the Buddha had a smartphone, or if Siddhartha had a smartphone, he would never have become the Buddha. Because for one thing, his father, who was king at the time, he would be calling, Siddhartha, every 3 or 4 days, scolding him. You stupid son, come back to the palace. You're the future king. Stop living your stupid lifestyle and begging for food. You're not a beggar, you're a prince. You know what I mean? Just harassing his son. And of course, his wife should be calling every day, right? Crying, of course. And how your baby son is crying for you. The baby son needs his father. You know what I mean? Or the emotional pull. To understand the teaching of no permanent self, you see, the anatta doesn't mean no self. It means no permanent self. You see the difference? No permanent self. Because as you say, we do have a self, whether we like it or not, because we're conditioned with it. It's a part of our conditioning. We didn't get to go into detail about the whole conditioning of self. Because to really understand it, you have to understand the thinking process. And we didn't mention it. We mentioned it during the retreat. But this evening we didn't mention it because it is created by thinking. And first you have to understand what the thinking process is. Unfortunately, we're not taught this in school. And this is why one of the questions I was asking was, what the hell is thinking? Because we're thinking all the time, and we're taught subjects, right? And we have to study, study, study to pass exams to be qualified. But nobody teaches us to understand what is thinking. And yet, we're thinking all the time. It dominates our consciousness. And although we need thinking in daily life, you know, rational, logical thinking, but thinking easily becomes very irrational, very illogical. You know, when it gets obsessive, you know, mechanical, when you start to worry about something, when it gets very negative, you know, very judgmental, and you have a lot of anger, aversion, you know, jealousy, hate, and those things. So the first thing, yeah, it's in the handout. You can give her the handout. Thinking is a response to three things in the mind. Memory, you can see that, right? Memory, past experience, and knowledge, information. It's something you reflect on, and then it is so obvious. Memory, past experience, knowledge, information. Thinking is a response. It's responding to these three things in the mind. And as you know, thinking projects itself in the future. All our minds do this, regardless of language. I mentioned before. It doesn't matter what language we think in. You know, whether it's Hokkien, Cantonese, Spanish, Russian, French, it's the same thought process. Based on memory, past experience, knowledge, information, and that projection into the future. So thinking is a movement in time. From past to future, past to future. And you, of course, when you practice, you see this obvious fact. And that's why we're conditioned with this idea of past and future. Now, you look at young children, their sense of past and future is not that strong. Because they're mostly in the present moment, you know, young children. Because when we start going to school, you know, we're getting more education and we're thinking more and we're using memory, of course, you know, in our studies. And then we think of schedule and all those things. Then the condition of the mind becomes more based on past and future. And of course, more thinking, right? More thinking. Because we're taught that intelligence means to think. You know, and the higher your marks, you know, in exam mean you're more intelligent, you're more smart. But the real wisdom, the real intelligence has nothing to do with thinking and, you know, knowledge and or academic qualifications. Because wisdom has nothing to do with knowledge. For example, you can have several university degrees or you have a PhD, but it doesn't mean that you have wisdom. They don't have common sense. You know the word common sense? Common sense is not common, believe me. And I know that from experience because I grew up where a lot of people did not have education. You know, they were illiterate. Especially the older generation of African descendants, because we had African descendants from the days of slavery, you know, the African slaves. But they had so much common sense, you know, natural wisdom, because they were not educated. So in other words, the more educated we are, we have less common sense. You know, natural intuitive wisdom. And a good example of this, they used to tell me two things when I was growing up, two things. One was, time takes care of everything. Some things last longer than some, but in the end, time takes care of everything. Now, in more modern English, what are they trying to say? That everything is impermanent. Do you see that? Time takes care of everything. Some things last longer than some, but in the end, time takes care of everything. It means all things are impermanent and changing. And the second thing they used to tell me was, if you take yourself seriously, you're going to have problems in life. Is that Dhamma or what? That is the Dhamma. If you're too attached to ego, your ego, you're going to have problems in life, in all your relationships, pride, arrogance, and all that stuff. And of course, the more attached we are to ego, we have more insecurity, more fear, worry, anxiety, and greed also. Greed, yes. Because when we are insecure and anxious, it doesn't matter how much we have, material wealth, it's never enough. It's never enough. You see, when you follow the path of Dharma, it doesn't mean you don't have to be a Buddhist. Remember now, the Buddha was not a Buddhist, and he wanted people to see the Dharma.
Well, what I meant is it saying that we don't take ourselves seriously, and is it saying we don't take our actions seriously?
No, it doesn't mean that. It means that you behave in a very responsible way, and you're not so proud, you're not so arrogant, and you're not so conceited, You're not so self-centered, in other words. Which means that you're more kind, you're more compassionate to others. It means that your relationships are much more wholesome. They're much more harmonious. Whether it's with family, whether it's with friends, whether it's with co-workers, and so on. Because in the end, it's really about the quality of our relationships, right? Because life is based on relationship. Even when you're alone, how do you relate to yourself when you're alone, right? How do you relate to the environment?
If relationship is based on trust, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you can't even trust yourself.
Yes, and mutual respect. Yeah, trust and mutual respect. And trust implies that you have a more relaxed attitude towards, say, a person. Or say, if you trust an animal, say a pet dog, it means that you're more relaxed with them. You're not afraid that they're going to bite you.
How do you deal with people who don't respect your rules? You don't even respect yourself.
Of course, to respect yourself means you have to be kind to yourself. For example, I met somebody recently, and she was a very unhappy person because she didn't respect herself. She was always torturing herself. Self-torture? Self-torture means you're very hard on yourself. You're quick to judge yourself. You're always trying to prove yourself. Either to your parents or to, co-workers or to your friends. It's very sad, actually. It's sad because there are many people like that, not just one person. And eventually, she was diagnosed with cancer. Because she even said to me, in her family history, as far as she knew, there was not, cancer in her family. So when we had this discussion, it was obvious that it was caused by her, all self-inflicted, mental, emotional stress. It was all self-inflicted. And of course, she's always trying to, achieve. And I said, you have to learn how to be kind to yourself. First step, you have to learn how to be kind to yourself, to be more compassionate. And naturally, she suffered a great deal from guilt. Guilt is a judgmental mind, afraid of making mistakes. And this is why it's important that when we make mistakes, we have to forgive ourselves for being human. Because we're not perfect. We are not perfect. But because of our social conditioning, we think that we should be perfect, right? See how the mind is so crazy, our human mind. And yet we think we're so smart. But actually we are very deluded. We are very deluded. And everyone makes mistakes. I like to say that everyone, including famous monks. Including monks, and the famous ones also make mistakes. Because monks are human. Welcome to the human world. You can say it is perfectly natural for us to make mistakes. Because we are only human. And this is why we have the practice of loving kindness. Do you know that practice? You send positive thoughts, first to yourself and then to others. May I be well, happy, and peaceful. May I be free from fear, conflict, and devotion. And you send it to others. Like, may my family be well, happy, and peaceful. May my family be free from fear, conflict, and delusion. And you send it to your friends. You send it to your co-workers. And if you're having conflict with somebody, it could be anyone, you send positive thoughts. Send positive thoughts to them. And then send positive thoughts to all beings. It's a very beneficial practice. Because when we do that, we replace those negative, judgmental thoughts with kind, positive thoughts. Tomorrow, tomorrow is a future life. And yesterday was a past life. So we've been through many lives in this life. Many than you would ever guess. Each day is a life. From the moment we wake up until we go to bed. You get a calculator, because you'll need one. How many years you have lived on the planet so far, and then calculate how many months, how many days. You'll be surprised, just on a daily basis. And the most obvious fact, if you could collect all your photos, do you have a collection of your photos, even from young age? Maybe baby photos, some people have their baby photo. If you could collect all your photos and line them up, put them in a line, right? And you look at them. Do you ever look the same? Of course not. Because, as we said, we are this process of body and mind. But to really see it as a reality, as opposed to being a concept, you got to really calm your mind and you got to reflect. The reflection is very important. And to reflect properly, you need a calm mind. Very important. So naturally, when we reflect, we need to use thinking, right? But there's a difference between reflective, contemplative thinking and just our normal, everyday thinking. Okay. Our normal, everyday thinking, what is the quality of it? It's normally what? It's very restless, and it tends to be reactive, right? Reactive. It tends to be self-centered, and it is very shallow. Blah, 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 blah. It's very shallow. but reactive, definitely. This is why one of the Dhamma teaching is learning how not to react so readily. And there is a difference between reacting and responding, reacting and responding. Whereas reflective contemplative thinking is different. It is calm, it tends to be more objective, objective. You're trying to see the truth of things as opposed to being self-centered. You know what I have to do, what I like, what I don't like, what I want, what I don't want, and so on. You see the difference. And of course, it is deeper because it's not shallow, it's not reactive. It's coming from a calm state. You're able to go deeply. You're able to see things more deeply. Just like looking at the piece of paper. I think you missed this part. When we're showing the paper and you go, we saw all the factors that cause this paper to come into existence. I think you missed that part. Yeah. But you can see the difference between, reflective, contemplative thinking and our normal, everyday thinking. It's very big difference. Very big difference. And I found in my own practice that if my mind was very calm, and then when I read some Dhamma, I could understand it at a deeper level. Simply because my mind was calm. Because Dhamma is deep. Whereas if my mind was not calm, and I read the same thing, my understanding is very shallow, it's very superficial. It's very profound, because it's dealing with a reality which is much deeper than our thinking mind, or normal thinking mind. But thinking is very limited. Thinking is very limited, just like all our knowledge is very limited. It's like somebody with a PhD, although it can be impressive at one level, but really somebody with a PhD, all it really means is that you know a lot, or a hell of a lot, about very little. Understand? About just one subject. You can research for 5-6 years about this one topic. But life is not just one topic, right? It's a multi-dimensional reality. And that's why thinking is so limited, because thinking is linear, linear reality, from past to future. But reality is not linear, right? It's a multi-dimensional, complex web, as we just said, complex web of interrelationships, interconnectedness. And scientists who study, who take time to study the natural world, realize these things. And they're able to take the time to study these things simply because they got funding. If they didn't get, proper funding, they wouldn't be able to, afford the time to really investigate. So what these scientists now are discovering about the natural world is something that the Buddha realized over 2,500 years ago.
Let us take a moment for a short intermission and immerse ourselves in the enchanting melodies of the awakenings. The song Searched beautifully explores the theme of pursuing everlasting peace. And now, please welcome Awakenings.
Alone in the still of the night, I sat struggling deep inside. Who am I? Where will I go? Why am I so afraid Why am I so lonesome with fear in my heart? Alone in the still of the night, vision of victory realize. Why am I feeling so low? Must success create this sorrow of mine? Why can't they quench my lost and searching heart? Maybe someday, somewhere, somehow, wandering ceases when wisdom dawns and truth to hold. To the sage of old, with folded palms I humbly bow, a weary traveler returning to Nirvana's fold. Alone in the still of the night dwelt I on worldly greed and pride. Why must wealth, hate, and war so? I search for peace, but darkness I find. Why can't they give me a true meaning in life?
Now, let's focus our attention to Dr. Bhante Poonaji as he presents the second part of his insightful sermon on behavior. Prepare yourself for a deep dive into his vision and guidance. His words promise to enrich our understanding and inspire us to reflect on our actions. Here it comes.
That is how the self comes into being, to personalize. So, this is important to understand. How you become a self. So, in other words, this self is not a rational concept. It's an emotional concept. So, however much we reason out and we begin to see that there is no real self here, you can use reason and understand that there is no real self here. Then what happens? Till you begin to feel, yeah, there is no self, but I want this, I want that. How that? I has not disappeared. Although we have understood rationally there is no self, but still the feeling of self is there. So the self is a feeling, not a rational concept. This is why even if you have understood there is no real self, you still have the feeling of self. And therefore, the only way to get rid of that self is to get rid of the feelings, the emotions. You see? Now that is what is called Sakkaya Ditthi, which is becoming stream entrance. That means entering the stream. Now this we'll be discussing later. You don't have to worry too much about that. But the important thing is that the idea of self is not a rational thing. Because if we examine rationally, there cannot be existence or even a self. Why? Now, self is supposed to be something that exists. And what is existence? Existence is a static concept in a dynamic reality. Existence is a static concept in a dynamic reality. Because everything is changing, every moment it is changing. But existence means it is not changing at all. Now when you are born, you see, you are just a baby. Now you grow up and become a young man or young woman. You are not a baby anymore. That means you have changed, completely changed. And then when you grow old and you die, that is another simply completely different thing. So from birth to death is a complete change going on. So that is a dynamic process. Existence itself, what we call existence, is a dynamic process. So how can it be existence? It is not existence. It is change. That is a process that is going on, changing. So existence is irrational. And it is emotional. So this is why we have to get rid of the emotions before we can get rid of the idea of self. And it is the idea of self that is creating all the problems. You know, Sigmund Freud thought all these problems are coming from the emotions. He didn't realize that these things are coming from the idea of self. This is a very interesting thing, but I don't want to go into this at this moment, because this is really based on a very important psychological thing that Buddha spoke of. You see, upadana was that personalizing. If you are interested in psychology, we can just mention that little. That Sigmund Freud spoke of the personality into three areas. The id, ego and the superego. Now the main thing is he saw that the id really refers to the emotions and the ego refers to what we call thinking process, intellect, or the thinking part. What the Buddha called mano and chitta. We discussed this last time. So, now the Buddha speak of 4 things you personalize. That means Kamupadana, Dittyupadana, Silabbata Upadana and Attavada Upadana. Now, Kamupadana refers to the id, really, which is the emotional part. Kam there is the emotions. Ditti refers to the thinking part, views. And Attavada, not Attavada. Silabbata. Silabbata is really the superego. The superego, which is making you feel guilty when you do something. That is the conscience, which the Christians call the promptings of God. But Freud didn't see as anything to do with God, but Freud saw it as something coming from childhood, where the mother and father will try to discipline the child. This is bad, this is good. Good and bad. The idea of good and bad is what disciplines you. That is your conscience. In your mind you think certain things are good, certain things are bad. So that is the Silabbata Upadana. And the 4th one, Attavada Upadana, the notion of self. You cling to the notion of self, or you personalize the notion of self. Now that part Freud didn't see. Freud saw only these 3 things. But the later Freudians began to take up this idea of self. And so they started talking about the self and the other. How you relate to yourself, the relationship between yourself and the others. So the later Freudians took up this. So their problem is mainly, they call it self, what is that?
Persuasion.
A assertiveness of the self. Now they see that mental problems are that they don't have self-assertiveness. And what they are trying to do as therapy is to help people to assert themselves. Self-assertion becomes important. And some of these psychologists, they have started Buddhist meditation. Now there is that psychologist called, what's that, Herbert Singh or some name like that. Now he and so many other psychologists have now tried to find out how they can relate this Buddhist idea of no-self and the psychological idea of self. They are always trying to strengthen the self. That is what the modern psychologists are trying to do. To strengthen the self, they practice self-assertion. But here, in Buddhism, we are talking about giving up the idea of self completely. So this has become a problem for them. Because according to their psychology, it is necessary to hold on to the idea of self. And in Buddhism, you have to give up the self. That is the problem that today most of these people, when they write books on Buddhist psychology, they have this problem which they can't solve. They don't know how to solve that. Because in Western thinking, I told you from the beginning, when Descartes said, I think, therefore I am, that idea they couldn't get rid of. Even present day philosophers are hung on that. I think, therefore I am. The thinking has become the self. In a way it is, because when we think, it is that thinking part, the cerebral activity, that is the thinking part. And that thinking part is what makes you conscious. Consciousness comes not from the perception, but from the cognition. That cognition is the thinking part, and that is the consciousness. You become conscious of a world outside. And that consciousness is only becoming conscious of something outside. But they don't know that consciousness is not aware of what is going on inside. How consciousness came into being? From where did this consciousness come into being? That they are not aware of. So that subjective part, they are not aware of. And so the modern psychologists, they thought science is advancing, but science is always focused on the object. When we talk about matter, it is the object. When we talk about energy, that is also object. And the psychologists like Sigmund Freud wanted to practice what is called introspection, that is looking at the inside, not the outside, looking at the subjective, not the objective. So what happened was, they started criticizing Freud as not scientific. Why? Because he is practicing introspection. But that is the science that the Buddha taught. Introspective science, not extrospective science. The introspective science is what makes you understand how consciousness comes into being. So that is what Freud saw as the unconscious. That means we are not conscious of consciousness. Not being conscious of consciousness is the unconscious. But that unconsciousness can be discovered only through introspection. Introspection is what is called sati. Sati is what today people call mindfulness. Sati is not mindfulness, sati is introspection. Looking within, not looking outside. Today people, when they talk about mindfulness, mindfulness simply means to become aware of what is going on. This is not aware of what is going on outside, but this is aware of what is going on inside. And that is why it is introspection and not mindfulness. Understood, yeah? So, the important thing to understand is always these steps, what I call the chain reaction. That is the organism reacting to the stimulus. Environment is stimulating the senses and the organism is reacting. And that reaction is a chain reaction. First is perception, then comes cognition, then comes emotion, then comes action. Now that chain is what has to be stopped. That is the suffering or dukkha that the Buddha spoke of. That reaction is the suffering. But the real suffering is in the emotional part. It is the emotional part and the action part that is producing the suffering. So, what has to be done is to stop the emotion and the action. But to stop the emotion, we cannot start from the perception part. We have to start from the action part. So stopping the action part is the starting point. And that stopping the action part is what is called sila. So the behavior in the sila, first is sila, the next is to calm down the mind, which is in the emotions must be got rid of, the emotional excitement. Now, for example, you become angry. Why you became angry? Why you became angry was how you interpreted your circumstance. You interpret what you saw or heard or smelled or tasted or touched. And according to the way you interpreted, the emotion was aroused. And because the emotion was aroused, it was expressed in speech or action. Now, the right thing to do is to stop that interpretation. But you cannot do that all at once. So the first thing is stop the action part. That is called sila. And the next step is to get rid of the emotional excitement. That is what is called samadhi. Samadhi is getting rid of the emotional excitement. Then the third step is to change the way you interpret your circumstance. And that is panya. Panya. Sila, samadhi, panya. Yes. So the panya is really changing the way you think. It's a transformation of the thinking process. So we have, when we talk about meditation, people talk about two kinds, samatha and vipassana. Samatha refers to that calming down the mind, freeing the mind of emotion. And vipassana refers to changing the way you think. Now you understood what sila is. Huh? Now when we think about sila, there is another important thing to understand. We are born self-centered. The small child that is born is always self-centered in the emotions. That means desire for pleasure and hatred of pain. These are self-centered. But that small child is not able to think properly. But as the child begins to grow up, the thinking part begins and the idea of self comes into being. And then you become selfish. I want this, I want that, and all that. Huh? So we are starting from a self-centered step. Huh? Now that self-centeredness gradually we begin to become aware of other people, mother, the father, the brothers, the sisters, and maybe other uncles, aunts, and all the relatives. And so we begin to understand that there are not only myself, there are other people also. And then your mind begins to expand outwards and you become if you begin to understand the importance of other people, that say, if I pinch you, you will be hurt by that. Now, if I recognize that, then I will not try to hurt you. So that means you are understanding other people's pain and pleasure. You begin to understand that other people also don't like pain and other people also like pleasure. So you see, so you try to help other people and not harm other people. That means you are expanding your interest, not only selfishness, you are also thinking of others. You are broadening your mind. That's the way to see. You are broadening your mind. And then you go beyond your family. Maybe you go to school and you think of the whole school. Or maybe you go further and think of the whole country. And that is what is called patriotism. But then you go beyond the country also and think of all the people in the world. But you may be thinking only of human beings, but then you begin to think of even the animals and even the plants. Environment, you begin to think of the environment. So, and you also begin to think of the whole universe. Maybe there are other beings in the universe. And so, this is why what is called the metta bhavana, metta meditation, is the friendliness towards all beings. And friendliness means you are thinking of the other person as important as yourself. That others are as important as yourself. So you are expanding or broadening your mind. And that broadening of the mind is what you do in beginning to control the mind. And as you begin to broaden your mind, you become more civilized. So in other words, becoming and beginning to behave in the proper way is also to become more and more civilized. So what we call civilization is simply where we broaden our mind to include others. So important to remember that what we are trying to do is to broaden the mind. And we will speak about the broadening further later. Today we can stop here.
What is the difference between samadhi and sati?
Samadhi and sati. Good. Samadhi is where we free the mind of emotional excitements so that the mind calms down. We keep the mind calm. That is the meaning of samadhi. These people, the translators, translate samadhi as concentration, which is completely wrong. Samadhi is not concentration. Samadhi is relaxation and tranquility of mind. That is what samadhi is. And now the word sati. I already said sati It's not mindfulness. Sati is introspection. Turning the mind inwards. Your attention, Sati really means attention. And Satipatthana is really Sati Upattana. Upa means inside, Apa means outside. So Upattana means to place inside. Attention to be placed inside. That means introspection. That is what Sati is.
What is the difference between Maitri and Karuna?
Difference between Metta and Karuna? Oh, that's a good question. Okay, now I have to keep explaining Metta, Karuna, Mudita and Upekkha. You see, this is the same state of mind, but in different aspects of the same state of mind. And that state of mind, now I spoke about broadening the mind. Now when the mind has been broadened, you are thinking of all beings, you are not thinking of yourself. That self-centeredness gradually disappears as
Alone in the still of the night dwelt I on worldly greed and pride. Why must wealth, hate, and war so? I search for peace, but darkness I find. Why can't they give me a true meaning in life?
Well, that's all for today's broadcast. If you have any concerns or questions, please do not hesitate to contact us at info@buddhadharmatv.com. Thank you for watching, and we're confident that our programs on the Buddha Dharma TV will inspire peace lovers around the globe. Good night. Namo Buddhaya.